All right, let's journey back in time to the 8th year of the Hijra. We're heading deep into a harsh, unforgiving landscape where a mission was about to unfold that would become one of the most remarkable stories of faith, strategic genius, and divine mercy in history. We're talking about the Battle of Mota. So, picture this. 3,000 men. That was the size of the Muslim force sent on this expedition. 3,000 believers, marching with absolute conviction, far, far away from the safety of their homes. And then, you see the number they were up against. A massive Roman army, along with their local allies. 200,000. The odds weren't just bad, they were by any worldly standard, completely and utterly impossible. Just try to imagine that scene for a second. You've got this small band of believers standing before a literal sea of soldiers, with the desert sun just beating down. The landscape itself, this vast, empty space, it almost becomes a character in the story, doesn't it? A silent witness to this incredible test of the human spirit. Now, here's the thing. This wasn't a surprise. The Muslim army knew the odds. They actually paused to discuss the staggering numbers they were facing. But they decided to march on. Why? Because they weren't driven by what the world considers success. They were there for a higher purpose. And in their minds, turning back just wasn't an option. And so the fighting begins, and it is just unbelievably fierce. The Muslim army fought with incredible courage, but the sheer size of the enemy force, well, it was bound to take a heavy toll, especially on their leadership. You see, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had set up a really clear chain of command before they even left Medina. First, Zayd ibn Haritha would lead. If he fell, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib would take over, and if he fell, Abdallah ibn Rawaha would take the banner. And in the searing heat of battle, that's exactly what happened. One by one, these three incredible leaders fell as martyrs. This is the moment where everything could fall apart. All three appointed commanders are gone. The army is leaderless. The banner, their symbol of unity and resolve, is literally lying on the ground. Annihilation felt inevitable. But, it's in these moments of pure chaos that true character is revealed. The turning point of this whole battle wasn't going to be a heroic charge. It was going to be a humble choice. So who steps in? An amazing man named Thaabit ibn Aqram. He's a veteran, respected, experienced. He rushes in, picks up the fallen banner, and he could have easily claimed leadership right then and there. Nobody would have argued. But he understood something crucial. In this specific crisis, he wasn't the man to save the army. So what does he do? He immediately turns to Khaalid ibn Al-Waleed, a man who'd only been a Muslim for a few months at this point. He offers him the banner. Khalid, out of respect, refuses it first, but Thaabit insists, saying something like, "Take it, I swear I only picked it up for you." That single act, putting the army's survival above any personal honor, that was the first step toward salvation. Okay, so Khaalid ibn Al-Waleed is now in command. And right away, the mission changes completely. This isn't about winning an unwinnable fight anymore. It's about saving every single man he possibly can. And this is where we see tactical genius truly shine. I mean, just stop and think about that problem for a second. How on earth do you get a tiny, exhausted army out of a situation like that? A head-on fight is suicide, but if you just turn and run, you'll be chased down and wiped out. He needed a plan that was more about psychology than anything else. What Khalid came up with was just a masterclass. Under the cover of darkness, he completely shuffled his army. He swapped the right and left flanks, the front and the rear guards. Then he had them make a ton of noise. So when dawn breaks, what do the Romans see? New faces on the front lines, and what sounds like a massive reinforcement army arriving. Their morale just wavers for a second, and that's the window Khalid needed to begin his brilliant, controlled withdrawal. And we really need to be clear here. This was not some quiet, sneaky escape. This was a brutal, running fight. Khalid's own words just paint this incredible picture of the intensity. To pull off this retreat, he and his men had to fight with a ferocity that is hard to even imagine, holding back an enemy 60 times their size. Now, while all of this incredible drama is playing out on the battlefield, something truly miraculous is happening hundreds of miles away, back in the city of Medina. This is one of those parts of the story that just gives you chills. The prophet, peace be upon him, is essentially getting a live feed, a divine insight into the battle as it's happening. With tears in his eyes, he tells his companions about the martyrdom of Zayd, then Ja'far, then Abdullah, at the very moments they fell. And then, after sharing this heartbreaking news, the prophet's tone shifts.
He tells them how the banner was taken up by a new commander, and the story he's sharing turns from one of sorrow to one of victory. Not a victory of conquest, but of survival and of divine favor.
He announced, "Until one of the swords of Allah took the banner, and Allah granted them victory." From that moment forward, that is who Khaalid ibn Al-Waleed was. Saifullah, the sword of Allah.
So when the army finally makes it back to Medina, you can imagine, not everyone gets it. Some people actually threw dirt at them, calling them deserters for retreating. But the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came out and defended their honor with these powerful words, reframing a strategic masterpiece as the victory it truly was. And this is where we see the other side of leadership, beyond the battlefield. After all the grief and glory, what were the Prophet's first actions? Pure compassion. He went straight to the house of his cousin Ja'far, he hugged his young children, and he established this beautiful tradition of community support, telling everyone, prepare food for Ja'far's family because they've been through enough today. So, when we look back at this incredible story, what do we actually learn from it? The Battle of Mota is so much more than a historical event. It's a profound case study in faith, leadership, and divine wisdom. The lessons here are just so powerful. First, we see that true strength comes from conviction, not just numbers. Then, through Thaabit, we learn that real leadership is humility. It's knowing who is the best person for the job. From Khalid, we learned that brilliant strategy can turn certain doom into survival. And through the Prophet, peace be upon him, we see that divine guidance is always there, and that real strength is perfected by mercy and respect. And all of this leaves us with one big question to really think about. The story of Mota gives us so many different models of leadership: the sacrifice, the humility, the strategic genius, and the divine compassion. It forces us to ask ourselves, when everything is on the line, what does it truly mean to lead?